The Grand Canyon cover-up. Did the Smithsonian hide evidence of giants? The lost discovery. The flash from Kincaid's camera sliced through the dark and froze a scene that should have been impossible. Rows of wrapped figures stacked in hand-carved alcoves, eyes blind under dust. For a heartbeat, the copper beside them blazed back at him. Then the light died and the cavern swallowed everything. The echo of his breathing was the only proof he was still above the earth. He would later swear the air smelled ancient, like tombs sealed before history began. But the photographs never surfaced. No museum display, no evidence, just one man's impossible claim lodged between science and nightmare. April 5, 1909. In the fading desert heat, the Arizona Gazette runs a story that sears its way into legend. It tells of an explorer, Kincaid, who discovered an immense underground city deep within the Grand Canyon. According to the article, the walls were lined with Egyptian-style hieroglyphs, idols that looked strangely Buddhist, and mummified figures, some over 9 feet tall. And the Smithsonian Institution, it claimed, had quietly sent a team to investigate. If even a fraction of it were true, it would rewrite the history of North America. It would mean that thousands of years before European contact, an ancient civilization, perhaps from Egypt, maybe from somewhere entirely unknown, had crossed oceans and built an underground metropolis in the heart of what's now Arizona. It would mean human history isn't a straight line, but a looping maze with erased chapters. But here's the thing, no one ever saw the artifacts. No photographs surfaced. And the Smithsonian, the most reliable museum on Earth, said they had no record of Kincaid, no record of Professor S.A. Jordan, who supposedly led the excavation, and no trace of any Egyptian relics arriving from the canyon. The agency's silence didn't end the rumor, it fed it. Because what got buried wasn't just an alleged discovery. It was an idea that maybe institutions don't tell us everything. That some histories are too disruptive to make it into the textbooks. And as the decades rolled on, the Grand Canyon mystery fused with older whispers. Giant bones supposedly unearthed in the Midwest, artifacts vanishing into museum vaults, maps hinting at sealed cave systems patrolled by federal rangers. Each new rumor stitched another thread into the same question. What are they hiding? Still, it all comes back to that one article. The Gazette headline promised explorations in Grand Canyon, financed by the Smithsonian. The details inside were meticulous: measurements, artifacts, a complex layout of tunnels and granaries carved into the rock. It sounded too elaborate to invent, yet too astonishing to verify. Historians later noted something odd. The Gazette was a small local paper known for boosting tourism, not breaking world history. And in the years that followed, no other newspaper confirmed a word of it. Even stranger, attempts to track down Kincaid himself led nowhere. No census entries, no military records, despite his claim of having once served. No living relatives. It's as if the man who stumbled upon a lost civilization never existed. So which possibility sounds more unbelievable? That a lone explorer fabricated one of the greatest archaeological tales of the century, or that he stumbled onto something real, and someone made sure it disappeared? The Grand Canyon is vast enough to conceal both truth and legend. Hidden chambers, collapsed tunnels, restricted cliffsides. It's a place where reality blurs easily with story. Yet for more than 100 years, this single report has refused to die. Historians dismiss it, conspiracists guard it, and explorers still search the canyon walls for an opening that might lead to that fabled city. And maybe that's the reason people keep coming back to it. Because behind every accusation of suppression lies a spark of wonder. The chance that the ground under our feet holds evidence of civilizations older, stranger, and far more connected than we've ever been told. To understand what that article set in motion, we need to go back to where it all began. One man, a river, and a cave no one can find. The river and the reporter. Kincaid introduced himself in the most matter-of-fact way possible. A lone explorer drifting down the Colorado River, sketching rock formations and photographing the canyon walls for a museum back east. He claimed to be a seasoned outdoorsman, a hunter for mineral deposits, someone who'd spent years with government surveys. In the Arizona Gazette story, he comes across as level-headed, precise, almost scientific. And yet, no records of his existence have ever surfaced. Not in state archives, not in census rolls, not in any Smithsonian field reports. It's as if the moment the ink dried, he vanished into the same dust he described. According to the article, his expedition was simple at first. Equipped with basic provisions, a small wooden boat, and a Kodak camera, Kincaid followed the Colorado through the Grand Canyon's winding arteries. The story paints him as solitary, a man dwarfed by cliffs that rose nearly a mile above him, floating through a labyrinth carved by time itself. Then came the scene that would anchor a century of speculation. He said he noticed strange stains on the sediment wall, nearly 2,000 feet up. From the riverbed, they looked like mineral deposits. But curiosity got the better of him, so he climbed. When he reached the ledge, he found the opening, an oval-shaped mouth framed by dark stone. Behind it, a passage sloped downward into what seemed an artificially cut tunnel. And that's where Kincaid supposedly struck his match. The Gazette reporter described what that flickering light revealed. Long hallways branching from a main chamber, walls etched with unfamiliar writing, statues of figures resembling both Buddha and Osiris, and copper utensils lying neatly beside stone tables. Mummified remains lay in groups, men wrapped in some resinous substance, measuring far beyond normal human height. Kincaid estimated some were 9 feet tall. He called the entire network a subterranean citadel. To a reader in 1909, this story fell right at the intersection of science and fantasy. Egyptology was new, dazzling the public with visions of golden tombs and ancient magic. The Grand Canyon itself had only recently begun attracting tourists after the arrival of the railroad. And Americans were obsessed with the idea of uncovering lost worlds, Atlantis, Lemuria, vanished races that could explain colossal ruins across the globe. A story connecting Egypt with the American Southwest wasn't just entertaining, it was irresistible. The report didn't stop at a single discovery. It described chambers arranged in a grid, granaries filled with seeds, hooks that might have held torches, and an auditorium capable of seating 50,000 people carved into the rock. Every detail fed the imagination, a forgotten people thriving beneath the desert, advanced enough to quarry vast caverns yet secretive enough to disappear without trace. And then came the institutional anchor, the kind of detail that suddenly made it sound credible. The article claimed that the Smithsonian Institution had been notified by telegraph. It said Kincaid was soon joined by a Professor S.A. Jordan of the Smithsonian's Department of Anthropology, who began organizing a full excavation. Box after box of relics, the story claimed, was shipped east for study. The reporter wrote that researches almost conclusively prove this race to be of Egyptian origin. But here's where the story takes its first odd turn. Even back then, no reporter could find this Professor Jordan. The Smithsonian had no record of him. Today, historians and librarians have searched every roster, every staff bulletin from the early 190s, nothing. The name doesn't appear anywhere in their archives. So either the Gazette fabricated him, or the professor existed only long enough to vanish. When readers picked up their papers in Phoenix that spring day, the story splashed across the front page like revelation. Yet no other paper followed it up. No wire service carried it. In an era when archaeological news spread faster than rumor, silence fell over the entire event. Why? Some historians think the answer is simple, a slow news cycle. Early 20th century journalists often filled space with adventure dispatches that blended fact, rumor, and fiction. Papers ran serialized travel diaries about explorers in uncharted lands, and readers knew they were half entertainment. The Grand Canyon had become a symbol of mystery, a natural stage for human myth-making. But still, this article read differently. The technical detail, the tone of first-person authority, the measurements, these weren't standard fantasy tropes. That realism made people wonder whether an actual explorer had at least inspired the piece. Maybe there really was a miner or surveyor named Kincaid who stumbled upon something he couldn't fully explain. Or maybe the reporter, knowing public appetite for mysteries, dressed up an ordinary cave story as revelation. What's fascinating is that the Gazette never retracted it, never issued clarification, never even mentioned it again. One publication date, one headline, and silence. The next issue went back to local business and social columns, as if the entire underground city had evaporated overnight. And yet, whispers began. Travelers claimed park rangers warned them about restricted caverns. Treasure hunters passed down folded maps showing sealed tunnel zones. In bars around Flagstaff, stories spread that Kincaid had been bought off, that a federal agency had declared the site off limits. None of it documented, all of it repeating the same question. If it was only a hoax, why erase every trace of the man who told it? Meanwhile, the early 20th century's fascination with Egypt kept soaring. Just a decade later, Howard Carter would open Tutankhamun's tomb and set the world aflame with gold-filled imagery. That wave of Egyptomania made Americans look back at the Kincaid story with new eyes. Maybe the canyon didn't hold an entire Egyptian colony, but what if it hinted at ancient contact, long-distance voyagers, or lost knowledge sealed away? Even skeptics found it peculiar how thoroughly Kincaid and Jordan disappeared. Archivists checked military rosters, U.S. Geological Survey expeditions, even steamboat crew lists, no matches. Modern researchers call the story a ghost in the record, a product of yellow journalism. Yet every decade someone new heads into the canyon hoping to stumble upon an opening high above the river, an entrance that shouldn't exist. Because deep down, everyone who reads that 1909 article feels the same tug, the thrill of a secret layered within the earth itself. The sense that maybe, somewhere along that endless river, an explorer did step into a shadowed hall and saw something carved before our remembered history began. But soon after the story appeared, the trail went cold, and the men behind it seemed to vanish with it. The vanishing explorers. When the Arizona Gazette hit the shelves, it was like a spark tossed into dry grass. Yet just as fast as it flared, it went dark. No follow-up edition. No confirmation. No public expeditions chasing the lead. For a story that should have shaken the archaeological world, its silence afterward feels eerie, like a discovery sealed at the moment of birth. People who tried to trace Kincaid's trail quickly hit a wall. Researchers combed through census lists, Army enlistment cards, Geological Survey rosters, even the Smithsonian's own expedition logs. They found plenty of explorers with similar names, but none matching the man described in the article, a middle-aged adventurer, veteran of river surveys, supposedly funded in part by a major institution. Kincaid wasn't in any directory, didn't appear on passenger manifests, left behind no family record, and vanished from correspondence archives that otherwise document nearly every field operative of the era. The absence was so absolute it almost looked deliberate. Some argued that clerical errors could have buried him. People fell through the cracks in the early 190s all the time, but not like this. Not someone allegedly tied to a Smithsonian-sanctioned dig. Not a man supposedly shipping crates of artifacts eastward. That kind of operation would have produced receipts, telegrams, budgets, something. Yet every trace evaporated. And then there's Professor S.A. Jordan. He's the second ghost in the story, a figure portrayed as the intellectual anchor behind the alleged excavation, head of the Smithsonian's anthropology department. Problem is, in 1909 that department didn't even exist under that title. There were anthropologists, sure, but no record of any Jordan leading a project in the Southwest. Researchers checked employee rosters, salary ledgers, field memos, nothing. Not a single Jordan connected to archaeology worked at the museum during that period. By the 193s, librarians at the Smithsonian were already receiving letters asking where the artifacts were stored. The responses were consistent: no such items, no expedition, no explorer by that name. They added that the institution had been blamed for dozens of imaginary discoveries over the years: giant bones in Tennessee, missing tablets from Peru, Viking relics in Maine. Each story ended with conspiracy theories about museum suppression, but none ever produced physical proof. Still, the Grand Canyon tale refused to settle. Amarillo teachers discussed it during geography lessons. Amateur archaeologists traveled west chasing coordinates copied from fading newspaper clippings. In the 190 SAXS, writers folded Kincaid's city into books about mystic America, linking it to Atlantis and Lemuria. Each retelling moved him further from reality and closer to myth. Yet no one ever uncovered even a cave remotely matching the description. So what happened to the man himself? Some say he died on that expedition, swept away by rapids, his story written from recovered journals later embellished by a creative reporter. Others insist he survived but was silenced, hired into secrecy, paid to disappear, perhaps working under another name. A few claim the site really existed, and that both Kincaid and Jordan were co-opted into a military project guarding the canyon's hidden chambers. None of those theories come with dates or documents, just campfire certainty. What historians can confirm is the Gazette's behavior. The editor on record, a man named H.B. Henderson, left no notes from that period. Surviving issues show that most of the paper's articles came from wire services or local announcements. The Kincaid piece is the only one in that year's archive to carry no byline. Its tone is descriptive but detached, suggesting it might have been rewritten from a letter or second-hand account. 1. Archivists later said the original print copy was composed entirely of typeset reruns, meaning the text arrived preformatted, almost certainly from an anonymous submission. That adds another layer to the mystery. Maybe there never was a reporter in contact with Kincaid at all. Maybe the explorer and his discoveries were the invention of a freelancer never identified by the paper. But even if so, where did that freelancer get the scientific precision of the descriptions? The measurements of mummies, the dimensions of chambers, the reference to granaries. Those weren't random. That language belonged to archaeology. Local historians have another idea. Around 1909, prospectors in northern Arizona occasionally told stories about old cliff dwellings or cave burials. It's plausible that one of those stories evolved into something grander in the retelling, drawing on public fascination with Egypt and newly discovered mummies in Peru. A decent writer could have combined those threads into a single narrative designed to sell copies. That explanation fits the evidence, but not everyone's satisfied. Some point out that the Gazette was a small operation with limited reach. If the story was only meant as fiction, why frame it as Smithsonian verified science when readers couldn't easily check it? Unless that name was included intentionally to lend authority. Perhaps because someone wanted the institution itself to respond. And respond it did. Within months, Smithsonian staff were fielding questions, and their official line, "We have no record of Kincaid, nor any Egyptian relics from the Grand Canyon," became the cornerstone of both skepticism and conspiracy. The more firmly they denied it, the more believers assumed suppression. What modern investigators find intriguing is the vacuum of follow-up reporting. No correction, no ridicule, not even letters to the editor challenging plausibility. It's as if the community agreed to forget it overnight. That collective silence only added fuel to the idea that someone higher up had stepped in. Today, every serious researcher who revisits the tale ends up confronting the same paradox. There's no physical evidence, no official expedition, and no living witness, yet the story endures with the persistence of fact. People have crossed oceans chasing the possibility that a century-old newspaper clipping covered something genuine. And maybe that's what keeps Kincaid's name alive. Because if he never existed, then who created him with such precision? And if he did exist, how could an entire nation's record-keeping erase him so completely? Whether the journalist lied, the explorer drowned, or the Smithsonian sealed more than just archives, one thing's certain: the paper trail ends exactly where the mystery begins. And that absence, that gaping hole in the record, is what keeps the legend breathing. Even now, hikers search the canyon's forbidden ledges and fissures, hoping to find the entrance he described. They rarely find more than shadows, but every shadow there feels meaningful. Because the truth, if it ever lived, is still hiding somewhere behind those walls of stone, waiting for the next explorer who refuses to vanish. The Smithsonian silence. For more than 100 years, the Smithsonian Institution has stood as the ultimate guardian of scientific truth, a temple of knowledge built on catalogs, measurements, and facts. So when people first wrote to ask about Kincaid, they expected clarity. What they got instead was absence. No forms, no crates logged in transit, no explorer by that name working under their banner. It wasn't even a close call. Every corner of the official record came back blank. The institution's first documented response to the rumor came decades later, when staff began compiling a list they called persistent myths. There, next to legends about buried giants and lost Viking tablets, sat one sentence in calm bureaucratic type: "The Smithsonian discovered Egyptian ruins in the Grand Canyon." Fact, it didn't. That should have ended the story. But the denial only deepened the mystery, because its tone, flat, dismissive, offering no detail, sounded exactly like what believers imagined a cover-up would sound like. By the mid-century, letters from amateur historians filled the museum's mailroom. People demanded to know what happened to Kincaid. Others asked if the cave site had been sealed for public safety. Internally, archivists wrote polite replies explaining that, despite endless inquiries, no documents existed. Externally, however, the silence felt strategic. Critics said the Smithsonian was protecting its narrative, the idea that North America's first civilizations developed independently of the Old World. Admitting an Egyptian presence would upend that timeline, forcing textbooks to rewrite the entire pre-Columbian chapter. And skeptics of the skeptics noticed something else: the perfection of the rebuttal. Every name missing, every shipment untracked, every clue erased. Believers argued that this level of absence looked curated, as if someone hadn't ignored the incident, but actively cleaned it away. If you wanted to erase a moment from history, they said, it would look just like this: immaculate non-existence. Inside the museum, curators pressed on with legitimate research. They were dealing with real artifacts, Puebloan pottery, ancient textiles, fossils. Yet outside those marble walls, Kincaid City kept rising again in rumor. Conspiracy writers claimed insiders had spoken off-record about sealed vaults beneath the museum, filled with anomalous bones and relics incompatible with modern anthropology. No credible evidence ever surfaced, but imagination doesn't need proof to thrive. That's when the story of the Grand Canyon merged with an older legend, the alleged giant bones suppressed by museums. 19th-century newspaper archives are littered with reports of massive skeletons found in burial mounds across the Midwest. Femurs the length of a man's arm, skulls twice normal size. Some of those reports came from small-town papers competing for readers, some from local antiquarians later exposed as hoaxers. Yet by the 194s, these stories fused with Kincaid's, suggesting the Smithsonian not only hid Egyptian mummies from Arizona, but destroyed giant remains shipped from across the country. From the institution's perspective, this was absurd. Their curators relied on federal funding and academic transparency. Destroying specimens went directly against their mission. But once an organization is cast as secretive, every defense sounds like deflection. Each denial becomes confirmation. And as the decades passed, the Smithsonian cover-up became folklore, a shorthand for unreadable archives, for the suspicion that some knowledge is guarded behind closed doors not because it's false, but because it unravels the accepted story. In reality, the Smithsonian's records from that period show something telling but mundane: bureaucratic churn. Departments merged, staff retired, documentation standards shifted as archaeology professionalized. Whole collections changed hands between divisions without consistent labeling. So when modern researchers say they can't find evidence of Kincaid, some argue it could simply have been misfiled, if it existed at all. That ambiguity, that microscopic possibility, gives the legend oxygen. By the 197s, television documentaries on ancient mysteries were citing the canyon story as a buried truth. Writers compared the missing crates from Kincaid's cave to Cold War secrecy, government installations out west, fenced-off caves marked as restricted zones on park maps. In reality, those zones often protect endangered species or fragile archaeological sites, but on paper they look like censorship. And that visual of blocked access fits perfectly into the narrative. There's something up there they don't want you to see. Meanwhile, genuine archaeologists stationed in nearby regions kept answering the same questions. Have you ever seen Egyptian symbols? Are there any forbidden caves? Most laughed, but a few admitted, off-record, that the canyon still hides thousands of unmapped caverns. The terrain is brutal, rock slides, remoteness, and temperature shifts make exploration nearly impossible. It isn't hard to believe that deep within those cliffs, untouched voids could exist, spaces as yet unseen by modern eyes. That reality makes the hoax feel plausible. No one can conclusively say there is no cave. They can only say we haven't found it. For conspiracy theorists, that's enough. They point to one line from an early 20th century survey map referencing a Kincaid plateau, likely named coincidentally after a local rancher, as secret cartographic proof. Others link the Grand Canyon's Egyptian-themed place names, Isis Temple, Tower of Ra, Osiris Temple, to coded nods left by insiders familiar with the true discovery. Geologists reply that these names were simply poetic labels chosen by explorers in the 180s, not references to anything man-made. Still, the connection is too neat for believers to ignore. By the 199s, digital forums had transformed the whispered rumor into a global narrative. Posts claimed whistleblowers had leaked photos of sealed Smithsonian vaults showing giant mummies tagged Grand Canyon. None held up under scrutiny, but the imagery burned into the collective imagination. The Smithsonian, adhering to its policy of not lending weight to conspiracy claims, refused to engage publicly. Silence again became the story. Maybe they're right, maybe there was never a cave, never an explorer, only an editor chasing sensation. Or maybe the institution truly did receive something it couldn't explain, something that would shred the tidy boundaries of official archaeology. Until someone opens a verified file or uncovers a single piece of material evidence, both possibilities live side by side.